Now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. And I'm going to be totally politically incorrect, but Merry Christmas, everybody. Happy Hanukkah. And that's it. Anyway, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's AppliedEnergeticsInstitute.com. And please do check out our archives at www.justenergyradio.com. Anyway, in this hour, we're going to be speaking to Frank Huguenard about Jesus, the missing knowledge. Let me tell you a little bit about Frank and get him on the air. Frank wanted to create a documentary on a topic that filled what he felt was a void. He wanted to take a spiritual route and to focus on comparing the teachings of Jesus with Hinduism. Frank's documentary, Beyond Belief, explores compelling new evidence that the 18 missing years of Jesus' life accounted for in the Bible were spent with Rishi, Yogis, and Swamis of India, and also focuses on a significant evidence that Jesus lived to be around 100 years old and was buried in Kashmir. So please welcome to Just Energy Radio, Frank Huguenard. Hey, Frank, how are you?
Hi, Rita. How are you doing? Hello, everybody.
I'm great. Thank you so much for coming on to the show. Happy holidays to you.
Happy winter solstice.
There, we got them all covered today.
Well, that's what it's all about, isn't it? They're all around the winter solstice, and that's no coincidence.
This is true. Frank, why did you begin a search into the lost teachings of Jesus? What brought you there?
That's a pretty long story. I've been, studying Eastern traditions for the last 10 years, and I found it very useful. And, what I like mostly about the Indian philosophies is that they're very scientific in nature in how they go about consciousness and the study of your own mind. And I had originally done a film called Beyond Me. And by the way, both of my films are available for free online. I've made them available to the general public at my website, beyondmefilm.com. And I got a lot of blowback on my first film because it had the inclusion of reincarnation into it. And so really what set me out on this particular journey was that I was determined to find out where Jesus, the teachings of reincarnations and Jesus' teachings were. And that led me down this sort of rabbit hole of finding about the Gnostic Gospels and really opened my eyes to a lot of stuff out there that it's not exactly common knowledge, but it seems to me that a lot of people know about a lot of these different artifacts and finds that have been located throughout the years. And so I've put them together in a really unique documentary called Beyond Belief.
I think that it is wonderful that a number of texts, the Apocrypha, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Judas and Peter, and all of these other texts have just recently come to light, where in the past there was just a belief that there was the Bible and the Bible and the Bible.
Right. I had an argument just yesterday with a traditional Christian who was arguing with me that I don't trust 40 documents that could be forgeries when there's proof that there's already 5,000 versions of the existing Gospels that go back to antiquity. And yet, in all of those 5,000 versions of the four canonical Gospels, there's not a single microgram or tiniest parchment of anything written in Aramaic, which is the original language that all these documents were written in. And so they seem to neglect the fact that actually none of the originals exist. And so there's literally hundreds of books, back from the age that have been destroyed over the years, and all we have left is the Bible, and that's what most Christians use as their fundamental argument.
And it might not, the books that we do have might not have been written, I'm going to say right after the death of Christ, which we now know wasn't even right after the death of Christ. They could have been written in 200 AD, or what we know is 200 AD versus 50 AD or 80 AD, which is where they try to place them.
Absolutely. They were written hundreds of years later. For example, in none of the original Gospels did Jesus ascend into heaven. That was only added hundreds of years later, and I think it's Matthew and Luke. I'm not a biblical scholar by any means. There's, people who've studied the Bible find that there's forged documents that are in the Bible. So it's, the pedigree of the book is highly suspect, and the intention of my film Beyond Belief is simply what we have really cannot be trusted. Certainly, there's a lot of most likely a good portion of what is in the Bible is legitimate, but we really don't know what's legitimate and what's not legitimate. And if you really want to understand what Jesus was teaching, then go study in the same schools that he studied at.
I have to tell you something, Frank. Your guides are hysterical. They're like cracking jokes at me, and it's like, sorry, won't laugh. They do that with some of my guests. They start like giving me these little commentaries. You were talking, and they were going, say it isn't so. But anyway, I'm just going to move along here. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is one of your investigations talks about Jesus during his teen years. In the Bible, in the New Testament, it talks about Jesus going to the temple when he was 12 years old. And that's all you hear about him until he actually starts his ministry. I'm not even going to do the math. A number of years later. And you have come up with some insights as to what he might have been doing during that period.
Right. We're led to believe that he became an enlightened master building tables and chairs in his father's workshop. That's it's possible. It could have happened that way. But what I've run across is both anthropological evidence. There's a book in the ancient Pali language in Tibetan temples in Kashmir called The Life of Saint Esa, the Best of the Sons of Man, and this was discovered in the 1800s, rediscovered, I guess it were. And this book chronicles the life of Jesus and how he had left the area now known as Israel or Jerusalem and Nazareth, and had traveled east. When he was born, there were the three wise men from the east, and people, they never really realized, well, this wasn't just from Jordan, this was from the east, with a capital T, and so these would have been rishis and sages who had come, from India to celebrate the birth of this child. And so, according to this book, he had traveled to the Punjab area in northwestern India, and then from there he went to Orissa, spent 6 years studying with Vedic scholars, and then went north and spent another 6 years studying with Buddhists. And basically he went on this 18-year spiritual journey, becoming purified and learning all of the great traditions on the planet before returning back to Palestine and beginning his ministry. And this, one of the most common comments I've received from so many different people is how comforting they've found this whole story, is in that it makes a lot more sense, and it's not the fear-based, sort of fire and brimstone version of Christianity that we've been led to believe. It's a much more a human version of the story.
Mm-hmm. What makes you connect Esau to Jesus? Is it because of the story, or are there other connections that tie the two together?
Well, the story goes ahead and tells you about, this man who traveled from Jerusalem. It's around the same time, born of a virgin mother. All the earmarks are the same. And then when he gets to India, the things that he is taught and the things he talks about, the language and the knowledge is almost identical. It's if you look, and you can find the book of Saint Esa online. I probably should have a copy on my website, but if you can just search for it, there's copies of it available. It's very short, I think it's like 256 passages. Each passage would be a sentence or something, and it's a very good read. It's a nice read, and explains how he was trained and had gone back, and almost immediately when he got back to Nazareth and Jerusalem, there were Jewish spies watching after him, and he was aware of it, and it tells the whole story about how he was then. The book was written probably 3 to 4 years after the crucifixion, so it tells not only about how he came and studied in India, but then it tells about the the passion, the arrest, the trial, and the crucifixion. So it's all there.
So there really is a pretty much blow by blow parallel.
Exactly, and of course, people want to go out of their way to discredit this book. We don't have pictures of this book. A historian or a journalist had discovered it. Like I said, I think in 1869, and there's been a handful of witnesses who have seen this book throughout the years. These are all documented in the film. And by the way, on my website, beyondmefilm.com, there are, if you go, there's a Jesus in India documentary page that I've put up, and there's at least 4 other documentaries that go into a lot of different detail. There's a BBC documentary. There's a couple others there that really go into all this other evidence that exists. But the sort of the centerpiece to my argument, and this is, I'm the first one who's done this as far as I can tell, my argument is the most logical argument, which is to say that Jesus was a spiritual, philosopher. And so the most compelling evidence that I look at that really places Jesus in India is the Gospel according to Thomas. Gospel according to Thomas was found in 1945. We knew it had existence. It existed. We had references to it in other books, but we never really had a full copy of it until the find at Nag Hammadi. And it's very easy to read. It's 114 sayings. Most of it's very esoteric. And but I had read it earlier this year on my search. I had heard that there was references to reincarnation in it, so I looked it up on the internet and I read it. It took me maybe an hour to read it. It's very quick. But as soon as I read it, I identified all of this as exactly the same things I've been learning, studying Indian philosophy for the last 10 years. My jaw hit the ground. It's like, oh my God, this is the missing link. The Gospel of Thomas itself is the Holy Grail that ties all this together.
Well, and I think there are a lot of things that came out of Jesus' teaching or his life and work, I'm going to say that are very different from Orthodox Judaism that he would have been practicing had he lived and grown up in Palestine.
Exactly, and then you look at what contemporary Christianity is, which has a lot more traditional Judaism than the things that Jesus was teaching. So it's almost like Christianity got subverted by, the Jewish influence. It's really quite amazing. I mean, Jesus came here to lead a jailbreak, and Christianity became a prison within a prison. It's very sad. Merry Christmas, everybody.
No comment.
Yeah.
Oh no, there was a question that just I've had these great questions and they just keep going right out of my brain. So let me go back to an earlier question that I had. But why would Jesus go to India in the first place? It's, today we don't think of 12 and 13-year-old boys going across the country. I mean, you put them on an airplane and they have to be escorted everywhere. To have this young boy just up and leave and go, almost halfway around the world to live somewhere else. Why would he do that?
Right, and this is, one of the most common arguments that I'll hear. Some people say, was there even a way to get there? And we know there was actually 2 ways. There was a spice route as well as a silk route. The spice route was through the water. People say, well, what about the language difference? And we know that St. Thomas actually lived in India, and he built a bunch of churches there. And so, for people to move to India and to learn the language was not an obstacle that couldn't be overcome. And then you look at the average age, how young people died, and the idea that someone who's basically just beginning their teen years could travel, that far and study, I don't think is that big of a deal. If you look at all the great Eastern traditions and the ashrams in India, this would be about the same age that the young pupils, would become disciples of these yogis. So it's not that unusual of a situation. Maybe it would be for people in Israel, I don't know. But in the Eastern traditions, it wasn't that big of a deal.
Well, and it's not so much the Eastern tradition, it's why he would go that far, who would invite him there in the first place. Because if there's someone who is living in India and then they go studying at an ashram, I would think it's, the one down the street, the one in the next town, that kind of thing. Not, I think I'll go across the country to go study at some place that I don't even know exists.
Right, and there's a couple answers, threads I can start off of this question. One is my next film, which I'm leaving for India in less than 3 weeks to do my third film, Beyond Reason, is really going to talk a lot about the ancient traditions and how scientific they are and why, they're, if you compare spirituality, all the schools of thought that deal with consciousness, to something like computer science, I could tell you, well, you can go to Purdue, that's where I went, it's one of the greatest schools, blah, blah, blah. And so, I want to make the case for how, the Indian traditions are like that. They're, they're older and they're more coherent and more scientific, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And the other thing is, if you look at the fact that he was visited by these 3 wise men at birth, and you take that as a fact, he had been identified as this enlightened master, or this potentially enlightened master from day one, and he had probably been groomed his entire life, and protected, and I guess they moved him to Egypt to protect him from Herod and all these things. So, it seemed like he was probably raised for his first 12 years in preparation of going to India or something like that. And certainly he probably didn't get on a camel and go there by himself. Most likely he went on a caravan. He was probably taken care of by an uncle or, some great man who came and ushered him over there, chaperoned him. So, but we don't have any of these details. We can only guess at this point.
And so you're kind of speculating. I mean, I think that's an interesting connection, that he might have been identified as the reincarnation of somebody, kind of like how they identify the new Dalai Lama. They go and they search the country and they say, and they kind of do these little tests, and it's like, you pass the test, you're the next Dalai Lama.
Exactly. And that kind of thing does happen, right? But that's exactly a really good comparison. It would have been something like that. And we have these stories, these 3 wise men showing up from the east. It's like, okay, where would that be? That would be India. And so, and there's a lot of, I'm not speculating very much. I've just done a lot of research, and I've looked at a lot of the different theories out there. There's a lot of evidence, but it's kind of sparse, and it's not really. The resources haven't been verified or whatever. There's not multiple sources all saying the same thing. So these are just all the different things that you run across when you research all this.
So maybe, why don't we talk maybe some comparison and contrasting between Judaism or even Christianity, I'll go with either one, and Hinduism, and maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the similarities and differences that you see between, I guess it would be Christianity, Jesus' work, and what you have seen in Eastern traditions.
Sure.
Am I putting you on the spot?
That's okay. I need the practice. I would even take Jesus completely out of the equation because the 2 schools of thought are, to me, almost radically different. The Eastern school of thought is that we are not our bodies. That we've lived thousands and thousands and thousands of lifetimes, and we come into this lifetime with impressions on our consciousness that lead us that have a lot to do with the traits and tendencies that we have. And those traits and tendencies that we have in our consciousness tend to attract different influences in our life, which then affect our behavior. And it's up to us to basically filter out those from the inside, to filter out those traits and tendencies and be aware of them. And from the outside, to make sure that we surround ourselves with good influences and try to avoid the bad ones. And that the end game in this worldview is to, basically purify our consciousness. It may not happen this lifetime. It may not happen next lifetime. But we're on this journey of lifetime after lifetime of becoming pure and ridding ourselves of these impressions that have taken millennia. And this is compared to the Abraham-based religions where, there's original sin, and we need to, if we don't obey a certain set of laws, we're going to burn in hell forever. The Eastern is much more of a loving, accepting, guiding, friendly, nurturing version of spirituality. It's not fear-based. And in fact, a lot of people wouldn't even call Hinduism a religion. They would just say it's a lifestyle.
Well, what's interesting is if you study, and I'm going to say Kabbalah, but mystical Judaism, it's a very different thing than if you look at, Orthodox Judaism in the general sense of the word. One of their beliefs is that the original sin had just dropped us into a lower vibratory pattern. According to some groups, it dropped us into a lower vibratory pattern, which put us into 3D versus 4D, and, getting out of the original sin or moving past it would move us back into being into an energetic state. So a lot of people go, oh, well, they're all about rules, but there's a whole faction that really looks at things from a very spiritual, energetic principle that you see, it is just right out there and up front when you're, talking about Hindu culture and Hindu philosophies.
Right, and this is really, what people really need to do is watch my first film, Beyond Me, which really discusses this at length. And if you watch the film with just the sole intention of keeping original sin in mind, it's very, very interesting, because what it talks about is how, the impressions on our consciousness, half of the impressions on our consciousness, or karma, if you will, come from our parents, a quarter from your mom and a quarter from your dad, and half come from your previous birth. And so you can see how, in that sense, there's this legacy of some whatever you call sin, but some vibrations that are carried forth generation after generation after generation. It's quite amazing. And I was talking to a guy the other day about, he's got this big thing about, we need to do something that gets all the religions, in harmony and talking with each other. I was talking just about the Kabbalah and Jewish Orthodox. It's like, how can we get all the other religions together when even within each individual religion, most people don't get it? And there's a big disagreement or misunderstanding about what the essence of the religion really is.
But a lot of people just look at it from, these are the rules we're supposed to follow, and they don't look at what to do to change themselves. They don't look inside. And most religions, especially the spiritual tradition of it, is really about looking inside, which is, I think, what Jesus' spiritual tradition was, which is Hindu, which is Judaism, which is Native American. I mean, they all want you to look inside, but no one wants to. It's
quite amazing that, basically Islam, Christianity, Jews, what is it, 95% of them really do not, as a practice or as part of the rules or as part of their rituals and their traditions, don't really look inside. It's, it's quite sad. Like I said, it's a prison within a prison. It's really not helping people move on and cleanse themselves of, this karma. And there's really no understanding of karma in the Western traditions at all.
Well, I think it's interesting, your comment about our consciousness being a quarter each of our parents and then half of it, a past life thing that comes through into this body. I think that's interesting. One of my little things is, because I talk about health and I'm a medical intuitive, and so I talk about emotional issues that sit underneath health concerns. And one of the things that I believe is that things like gallbladder disease, diabetes, et cetera, that tend to run in families, quote unquote, are because of some vibratory pattern, some piece of consciousness that gets passed along from generation to generation that might not have anything to do with you in this lifetime. I mean, other than its effect on you.
Yeah, absolutely. Watch Beyond Me. It's really, I go and explain how. There's this one of the most amazing things in the animal world as far as instincts to me is the migration patterns of the monarch butterfly. And the monarch butterfly starts off its life, or a multi-generational life, in a small mountain chain cluster in southern Mexico. And the first generation flies up to Texas, the next one up to Oklahoma, the next one up to Kentucky, the next one up to Indiana, and so forth. And it takes 5 or 6 generations of monarch butterflies to get up to Canada. And then the 6th generation will make the 2,500-mile trek all the way back to the same mountain, the same tree that their great-great-great-great-great-grandparent roosted in. And, of course, science, and especially in the West, just says, well, that's just a mystery of nature. We don't understand how something the size of a leaf can have that much information based on, in their genetics. But when you look at this formula, you can see, oh, wow, there's actually some retention. There's a fragment of consciousness that's carried along lifetime after lifetime after lifetime that has that information. There's not a GPS device in the butterfly. It just knows because it's been there before. It's at some level. And then I go on to compare basically human personality disorders to these same instinctive patterns, and that it's up to us to do the internal work to look within to cure ourselves of these butterfly, of the patterns that we have. And that, they say a leopard can't change its spots, which refers to people being unable to change, and it's completely false. We are actually able to change, but you just have to look inside to do it.
Well, actually, people that have miraculous healings always recognize that they have undergone significant and huge changes, physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
Sure. It's mind-boggling to think. Well, you've got this thing called karma, and the karma gets embedded into the DNA. The DNA gets embedded. Where do you draw the line between nature and nurture when it's all, mixed in together? It's quite awesome.
Mhm. Anyway, we're so way off topic, but it's interesting conversation.
Well, it is the topic. Jesus came to teach all this stuff. He went and learned it all, and he brought it back, and he said, "This is really amazing, and and you need to meditate, and you need to, and here we are celebrating Black Friday and Green Monday, and all this stuff has nothing to do with what he was really teaching. That's why, to me, it's much more important to talk about the missing knowledge of Jesus rather than the missing years. This is what he came to teach."
And it's not Black Friday. That's the day after Thanksgiving. Come on.
No. That's what I'm saying. We have Black Friday. We've got Green Monday. We've got, whatever Christmas has become, is a gross distortion of, what Jesus was really trying to teach back in the day.
Right. And I remember my question, one of the things that Jesus brought forward that you don't, and I don't know about other people during his time, but he was a healer, and there is such a huge tradition of healing, energy healing, or, on that level that comes out of India, and miracle stories that come out of India, and that was one of the things that he was obviously very well known for in his lifetime.
Right. Go read autobiography of a yogi. I mean, it's a great story. And it's a contemporary book. It's about, the stories in it are 100 and 120 years old, but it's got all kinds of healing stories in there that read like the Bible. And, that's just one example. But, yeah, these healing modalities, or whatever you want to call them, are, you just go back into ancient times in India. It's just always been how they've gone about business in their spiritual realms. It's no big thing for them. They don't really look at Jesus as a healer. They love Jesus in India, but to him, he's just the saint of compassion. But they wouldn't really think of him so much as a healer, because that's nothing new for them. They have lots of healers.
But I have to think about it, West. In the West, it would be something a little more out of the ordinary.
Oh, completely. Yeah, although there were magicians at the time, and a lot of people just looked at some of the stuff he was doing or heard about it and say, well, that's just a circus trick, or he's pulling things out of his sleeve and that kind of stuff. And it's really not. It's not a very good way to get followers to go around performing miracles. But that's. It just shocked a lot of people. He came back and was, healing people and making the blind see and the deaf hear and all this stuff. And just amazing people with what he was able to do.
Is there any evidence, other than the life of Saint Esa, is there any other kind of evidence of Jesus' time or life in India?
There's in churches. There's in the stones, in the carvings, there are sayings that are attributed to Jesus that they're quotes from him that sound like Jesus. There's a whole episode of what happened after the crucifixion that's different from the Western version. We know he was alive, if we're led to believe what's in the Bible. He was alive after the crucifixion. And the crucifixion story I found out in my research, again, this is commonly known throughout a lot of the research material, a lot of anomalies about the crucifixion itself. He was only on the cross for 6 hours, which is really a short amount of time. Usually it takes up to a week for someone to die on the cross, and the way that they die normally is through suffocation, actually, which is something I learned, that basically you're unable to hold your chest up because you're hanging by your arms and you can't breathe, and so you die that way. And so usually after a couple of days, if you don't die, they'll break your legs so that you can't push yourself up and support yourself anymore. And we know from the Bible that they didn't do that. It's very suspicious that they would hang him on a Friday afternoon, hang him on the cross on a Friday afternoon, because Saturday was Sabbath, and it would have been a gross insult to the Jewish nation. There's a lot of conspiracy theories, including in the Gospel of Peter, that there was a deal, a conspiracy deal with Pontius Pilate, where they said, okay, we're going to put him up on the cross, but it's only going to be a few hours, and you're going to take him down, blah, blah, blah. We know that Joseph of Arimathea brought in 100 pounds of healing herbs into the cave after they took him off the cross. Now, why would you bring healing herbs, aloe and other herbs, into a cave of a dead man? Why would you do that? And so, we don't know what happened. Did he die on the cross? Did he have a near-death experience? Did he go into some sort of yogic trance? One experience I've had in meditation is I stopped breathing and my heart stopped beating for 10 minutes once. And so I know this is possible, and I've researched it, and I've found out that this is something that yogis can train their minds to do. So in any event, he survived the attempt on his life, or maybe he had a supernatural experience. The Shroud of Turin seems to be an interesting artifact that points to, maybe something really extraordinary happened. But in any regard, he was alive afterwards, and he didn't ascend into heaven according to the original gospel. So where did he go? He went back to the one place on the planet where he knew where he was safe, which was Kashmir. And he, according to a lot of evidence, he lived there until he was around 100 years old. There's a lot of ancient scriptures. There's something like 29 or 32 different books in the East that reference him after the crucifixion. And there's a tomb in Srinagar, Kashmir, at the Rosabal Shrine, which is purportedly the tomb of Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ or Saint Esa?
Oh, it's not. It's neither. I'm just saying that because that's what we all look at and say, oh, that's his grave. It's the grave of Yusuf. But if you look at the evidence, that's presented in my documentary as well as all the other ones on my website, it's fairly compelling. It's not, and there's still bones there, and they're doing research now trying to, get the DNA off the bones and that kind of thing. It's heavily ruled by Muslims in Pakistan right now, and so, and they're adamant it doesn't go along with their faith that this is Jesus, and so they're not exactly cooperating.
But they have gotten some samples, so they can do some carbon-14 and try to do some DNA work.
Correct. And there's one of the tradition. Yeah, that's all. That's an ongoing process, and it's very highly political. And there's, it's possible that some of the people involved are corrupt. At this site, there are what they do with saints when they die in India is they'll model some handcrafted footprints in honor and respect of the person, with something signifying that person in the footprint itself. They're not really footprints. They're just models. For instance, on Buddha's temples, they'll have these footprints, and they have something that signifies Buddha. And on the footprints at the shrine, there's holes in the feet there's scars or holes in the feet where nails would have gone for someone who was crucified. And that was pretty shocking to me, just to find all this out and realize, oh my gosh, this is all. I don't think I slept for 2 nights after I found all this out earlier this year. Being raised Catholic and realizing, oh my God, I always thought that Catholicism,
big lie.
It's the norm. It's like, what? He actually lived to be 100 years old, and blah blah blah, and yeah, and and this is pointed out a lot in my film that Christianity by the 3rd century was divided into 2 distinct groupings, which was the Pauline version, which was in Europe, and the Romans eventually adopted it. But yet there was a completely separate version of Christianity that ran through Syria and Palestine and Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, all that area. I don't know what those countries were named back then. And that was what's called Gnosticism, which is a loosely knit group of people, but the Gnostic traditions are almost identical to Hinduism. And so you had 2 versions of Christianity, and one version became the official state religion of the Roman Empire. If the United States government came out with their own version of a religion, how much credibility would you give it? And yet the Roman version of Christianity was the one that predominated and prevailed because they had the Roman Empire behind it. So it's all very fascinating, and it's shocking to me, again, as someone who was raised Christian, to learn all this stuff and realize, yeah, there's been deception and politics and governance, and the original teachings, the original knowledge that Jesus came to teach was all subverted.
I just wonder what kind of impact, and it was just speculative, obviously, what kind of impact knowledge that Jesus didn't die on the cross would have on Christianity in general. Because there's so much based on the resurrection.
Correct. And it's, to me, it was a good thing. It wasn't like my faith or my beliefs grew weaker. It was almost like, well, wait a second, this doesn't change anything. Now that you look, and I'm not the first person who's noticed this. There's been a lot of Catholic priests or Catholic or Christian scholars who've then gone to India and studied all this, and when they've learned the Eastern traditions, it's pretty much unanimous that once they get to that point of knowledge from the Eastern perspective, and they look at Jesus, they're like, oh my God, this is the same thing that he was teaching. And once you get to that point, and you understand his life in what he was teaching, it just makes it that much more powerful. It provides just a much more coherent worldview, and you can look at other teachings and blend them in together and say, okay, this is what it is. Unfortunately, the impact, I don't know. You got a lot of people with their blinders on who, to them, 99.9% of Christianity is the resurrection and this belief that he died for your sins, which is not, I don't think that's right. And so,
Yeah, I can't really picture Jesus running around saying that.
Yeah.
Wait, I'll die for your sins.
Yeah, it doesn't. And what is he saying there? I'll die for your karma. Your karma will be expunged by me dying, and then you'll go to heaven. It's like, I think what it is
I don't know. That ain't working for me, Frank.
So check this out. So I'm going to go die, and then I'm going to and then I'm going to come back alive. What does that show you? That shows you that we are not our bodies, which is the Eastern tradition. I'm going to prove to you that we're not our bodies, that we're eternal, and that what keeps us trapped into this three-dimensional world is these impressions on our consciousness. So here it is, we are not our bodies, and it's up to you to purify your consciousness so that you can get on, with an existence outside of this plane. So, someone who took that basic knowledge and twisted it into in a way that could be used to manipulate people to obey, to be obedient, and pay your taxes and all that kind of good stuff.
It always makes me wonder what Jesus would say, either at this point in time or, could you imagine if they had like internet, back in 60 AD, and he could go on Facebook and, check out what people were saying about him. It's like, yeah, he rose from the dead and, the rock rolled back and all this stuff. And he's like hanging out in India, going,
well,
what?
But he did have internet. I mean, a lot of people ask me, well, if he was in India, why would he let them do all this stuff? Most of the apostles, the original apostles were killed around 60 AD, and then the war in Jerusalem in 64 AD. He would have been sitting there in a cave or whatever in Kashmir with complete awareness of what was going on. Because he was an enlightened master. He would have had those skills, and so he would have been able to observe and. You look at what he was able to accomplish in spite of the fact that Christianity became a gross distortion of what he was originally teaching. That he overturned. He brought significant change to the world. It may not have come out the way that he wanted it to, but I think he had maybe a 2,000-year plan, and now it's finally unfolding in a way that's going to become what he had really intended. I don't know.
So we talked about the passion play thing in the first hour, but I'd like to get your take on why did they decide to get rid of him?
Why did they kill Socrates? Socrates.
I didn't know that they killed him. Oops.
Yeah. It's the same thing. I mean, throughout time, people have, if you look at Plato's cave, when people when you're a heretic, when you look at the world differently than everybody, you're a threat to their belief systems. And I think by the first century, the Jewish church had become highly corrupt, and he what did he do? He threw the merchants out of the temple, and he was pretty disgusted with a lot of what was going on with what the Jewish faith had become, and he was teaching something that gave away their control. by telling people that this is there's reincarnation and you're responsible for your own karma, and you don't need a middleman to talk to God. Whatever it was he was teaching was in direct contrast to what the priests and rabbis of the time were teaching. He was a threat to them. There's a lot of argument. Well, did the Romans kill him, or was this done by the Jews? And I've done a lot of research. I mean, we don't really know, but the Gospel according to Peter implicates the Jews. There seems to me there's a lot of compelling evidence that this was arranged by the Jewish leaders of the time and done through the Roman Empire or through the Roman army, who they were in cahoots with.
Because they saw him as a threat or an aberration to what they were teaching.
Correct. It's very interesting. If you talk, I almost want to make a documentary film and just interview Jewish people and talk to them about Jesus, because I get the same answer from Jewish people everywhere. And I make, and for please, anybody who's interested in this, watch the end of my film. The closing argument's really great, but Jesus was arguably the greatest Jewish teacher ever. I mean, there may have been more enlightened Jewish people or whatever, but Jesus was a teacher. Whatever knowledge he had, he taught, and he was a great, great Jewish man. And yet, when you talk to Jewish people, well, what do you think about Jesus? And the first thing they always say is, well, we believe there was a historical man named Jesus. We just don't believe he's the Messiah. Like, what? And I get the same answer from Jews around the world, the same, almost the exact same sentence. It's right. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. It's like, wait a second. What does that have to do with my question? Why would you give me this pat answer? Are you capable of independent thought, or are you reading this from a book? Why would you tell me the same thing in Indiana that I hear in California, that I hear in Africa, or whatever? It's amazing. Here's the greatest teacher, the greatest Jewish teacher ever, and your response is, well, he wasn't the Messiah. Who cares? You should be proud of this guy. He was a phenomenal philosopher, and he taught all these great things. So, if that doesn't speak to some grand cover-up, some grand conspiracy that has silenced the Jewish people, I don't know what does. It's really amazing.
All right, I'm going to share this
hopefully
with you.
I haven't offended anybody yet.
No, we are like so politically incorrect on this show. It's good. That's why I have you here. Come on. I used to do this little question and answer thing, and so I asked the question on the show, who discovered America? Which nobody answered. And so I went around and I just asked people, especially people that were not from America, who discovered America. And the answer I got inevitably was Columbus. And then if they were a little more forward-thinking, you would maybe get, the Vikings, and, you'd get a couple of other alternative things. And it's kind of like, okay, what about the Native Americans? They were kind of here. And, but there's part of it, I think, that we buy into the programming and what we see on TV and, what we're told, staying inside our little box and not really stepping outside that box, which is sad.
It's sad, yeah. And again, I'm not trying to preach or say anything definitive in this documentary beyond belief, other than, wow, look at this. This is more confusing. It's more broader in scope than I ever imagined. The pedigree, the legitimacy of what is in the Bible is highly suspect. If you really want to understand what this guy was teaching, go to the same schools and then make up your own mind. And that's the point I'm trying to get, is just to open up people's minds and say, you know what, maybe we haven't been told the truth.
But I think you also make the point that if you believe in the teachings of Jesus, then you should open your mind and open your heart to a totally different philosophical system, because maybe, just maybe, they might have something important to say that would be in line and parallel to what you already hold to be true.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, all the religions, and again, I already made the claim that Hindu is not really a religion, have this mutual exclusion built into them. If you're not one of us, you're going to burn in hell, whatever, in whatever form that takes. And so people really miss out on looking at it, having a comprehensive worldview and understanding we've had many masters. They've all been able to share things, and, they're all teaching the same things, but, maybe through one method of teaching or another, one system of thought or technique or method works better with you than another method, and there's a wealth of knowledge out there, and don't be exclusive in your thinking. There's a ton of stuff out there.
Well, and I think one of the things that is happening, I'm going to say now, I would think that it's happened at well, maybe not, I don't know, is that people are moving out of seeing themselves as being religious and seeing themselves as being spiritual, and are actually looking to get more answers than only what the church provides. And I think your film kind of gives them some clues and gives them some avenues that they can look at and follow to start broadening their experience.
That's my hope. That's my intention, and that's what my first one, Beyond Me, was about, and my next one, Beyond Reason, is really going to try to drive home is to really approach that demographic. I feel like the people who are fundamentalists are really unreachable. But there's a large and growing segment of the population that's looking for the truth. We've spent all our money and we're still not happy, and are seeking. There's a lot of truth seekers out there, and so what I wanted to accomplish with these was to put out something that was thought provoking and sort of help guide people along.
Well, I think one of the other things that's interesting is that as more people start becoming aware of kind of what happened in the church, as far as like the followers of Peter and the Gnostic material versus like Paul, and kind of some of the conspiracy stuff that has gone on that's like, say it isn't true. They're good Christians. It might make them stop and take another look at what they're putting what they're banking on.
I hope so. But like you said it, they're heavily invested in their belief system, which is why I called it Beyond Belief. It's a huge challenge to try to go to these people and say, maybe, but that's what conspiracies are all about. People have become very effective at telling great big lies. The bigger the lies, the harder they are to accept that they're not true. Look at 9/11. Wait. How did that get in there? I
don't know. It just slipped out. Jesus did it. I swear.
Yeah.
He brought the wrath of God down on those two towers and Building 7.
Building 7? What's Building 7?
Building 4? That other one that went down.
No, I'm joking. So many people don't even know what Building 7 is. But anyway,
okay.
We're running out of time here talking about some silly stuff.
Yeah, but it makes my show. So
absolutely.
Anyway, so when are you going to be working on your new film? Have you started working on it, or is it just in the planning stage?
No, I'm flying out on January 11th. I did a trial run. I went down to L.A. to interview a Swami at the Vedanta Center. But I'll be traveling throughout India, and it's not going to be, pictures of the Taj Mahal and, the Ganges and all this kind of cliche, I'm a white boy traveling India. What I want to do is travel and speak with some of the greatest spiritual teachers on the planet in India. I've got a series of questions that I've identified, that are going to be able to really portray what I want to convey in this film. Hopefully I'll be, and there's a few people on the East Coast, New York, Boston, New Jersey, that I'll be filming when I get back in May. And like I said, the film's Beyond Reason. It's basically the trilogy is first we need to go beyond ourselves and realize that we're part of something much bigger. Then we need to go beyond our belief systems. Our belief systems sort of they're, like I said, they're prisons that hold us from going forward. And then we need to go beyond our intellects. That our intellects are basically based on our perceptions. They use our perceptions as a base, and our perceptions are based on our five senses, and anything our five senses feeds us is not real. But in order for us to get beyond all of our intellect, and experience self-realization or enlightenment or whatever you want to call it, we need to use our intellects to come to this conclusion that our intellects can only get us so far. And so I'm thinking it's going to be a really phenomenal film. Hopefully even potentially a theatrical release. But we'll see. Hopefully I'll be done with post-production sometime in July.
Cool. Well, that was a very cool little segue. The music is going to come up here in 1 second. Or not 1 second, but in a second or two. So what's your website again, and where can people go to watch the first two films?
It's beyondmefilm.com. The first film is called Beyond Me. I think you can just Google that anyway. But beyondmefilm.com, and please, send the links to all your friends and family and share them on Facebook. The films are free. I've produced these. Basically, I learned how to meditate a few years ago, and it's the most wonderful experience in your life. And everybody should learn how to meditate. So I made these films to help people get there.
Okay, so Holy Moses put in the chat room. Call me, Frank, if you need any extra hands and hearts. So I don't know if you know Holy Moses, but that's the message. Frank, thank you for coming on the show. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll connect when you get your next movie done.
All right, Rita.
Sound good?
You have a great 2012.
Okay, thanks, Frank.
All right,
that's
bye-bye.
Frank Huguenard. His website is beyondmefilm.com. And next week we're doing an astrological doubleheader. We have Michelle Levante and Deborah Clement both coming on to talk about 2012. So be prepared. Till then, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to www.justenergyradio.com for more show information and to contact Dr. Rita. Until next time, remember,